mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue aux séries 2021 de sessions virtuelles de CPSC. Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the CSPC 2021 virtual session series. Before beginning, I would like to acknowledge the land where I am talking from. I'm in Richmond Hill, Ontario. This is the traditional land of Wenda Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples, whose presence here continues to this day. And we would like to thank them and other Indigenous peoples for sharing this land with us. We are pleased to start off our 2020 virtual event series with a panel on the occasion of the March the 8th, the International Women's Day. Happy March 8th in advance, and also pleased to have a fantastic lineup of panelists with us today. My role is to briefly introduce them and leave the whole thing in the capable hands of our moderator. And let me start off with introducing our moderator today, Dr. Imogen Ko, who is a professor of chemistry and biology at Ryerson University, an affiliate scientist at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. She was the founding dean of the Faculty of Science at Ryerson from 2012 to 2018. She is currently the president of the Canadian Molecular Biosciences Society and sits on various boards, including the Michael Goran Hospital and Science Rendezvous. In addition to her work as a research scientist, Dr. Ko is an award-winning advocate and activist in Canada with respect to the integration of principles of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, particularly into research cultures in academic science, research, and medicine. I also want to acknowledge and thank Dr. Ko for hosting us, CSPC office, for several years at the Faculty of Science at Ryerson University. And she threw her support behind CSPC, and she has been our mentor for EDI principles and helped us to integrate the EDI principles into our operations and work through the EDI lenses all the time. And she held us accountable and kept us, always have kept us on our toes for that. And I want to thank Dr. Ko for spearheading this panel and all along support to us at CSPC. And the next panelist, Dr. Taima Moeke-Pickering. She is a Maori of the Métis, Kukeko, Tuhoe tribes. And my apologies if I mispronounced any name. She's a full professor in the School of Indigenous Relations at Laurentian University, where she teaches courses on Indigenous research, methodologies, international Indigenous issues, and United Nations and Indigenous social work. She has extensive experience working with international Indigenous communities, evaluative research, big data analysis, and photo voice methodologies. She's a co-editor of the book, Decolonizing Indigenizing Education in Canada, published in 2020, and lead editor for the book, Critical Reflections and Politics for Advancing Women in Academia, 2020. The next in line is Dr. A. Chenier. Dr. Chenier is a historian of gender, sexuality, race, and colonization at Simon Fraser University, where she also served as president of Academic Women. In the recently released report, Radical Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity for Female Faculty at Simon Fraser University, they argue that equity work means practicing an ethic of care in solidarity across difference. The next panelist, Dr. Alice Aiken, is a Vice President of Research and Innovation at Dalhousie University in Halifax. Her research focuses on health systems transformation and evidence-informed policymaking with a focus on military and veteran health. Dr. Aiken is currently Vice Chair of Governing Council of the Canadian Institute for Health Research and chairs the Board of Research Nova Scotia. She's elected to the College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists of the Royal Society of Canada, and she's currently the honorary captain for Canadian Forces Health Services Atlantic and a Dame of the Order of St. George. For her commitment to the health and well-being of military personnel, veterans, and their families, she has received Canadian Minister of Veterans Affairs commendation and Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal, and the Chapel of the 4th Chaplain Legion of Honor Bronze Medallion. It was hard to pronounce the whole thing at once, I must say. And Dr. Aiken has also been in CSPC Award Selection Committee for the last 2 years, and we take pride in that. The next in line, Dr. Cara is a professor in the Faculty of Medicine and Pharmacy at the Université de Montréal and an international expert in sex and gender-based analysis. She holds positions in the Departmental Science Advisor to Health Canada and is also the scientific director of the Institute of Gender and Health for the Canadian Institute of Health Research. I must take pride in saying this and mentioning that she was the recipient of the CSPC Awards for Exceptional Contribution to Science Policy Trailblazer category in 2020. And the last, but certainly not the least, Dr. Janni Aragon. Dr. Aragon is an adjunct assistant professor in political science at the University of Victoria. Her research interests include gender and politics, American politics, women and technology, third wave feminism, social movements, and translational feminism. She's currently working on a project focused on pedagogy, popular culture, and technology entitled Feminist Pedagogical Border Crossing Using Popular Culture to Teach Globalization to the Next Gen. And Dr. Aragon was the chair of the Academic Women's Caucus at the University of Victoria and serves in various positions, president of Caucus for Women and Justice and Science, chair of the Gender and Politics section and Teaching, Research and Professional Development section of Regional Political Science Associations. I want to thank all the panelists. As you can see, we have an exceptional lineup of speakers here, and I would like to ask Dr. Ko to start moderating the panel.
Thank you very much, Medad. It's truly an honor to be joined with this group of amazing, outstanding, and just exceptionally accomplished women from across the continent. When I first saw the list of potential invitees, I said to Medad, I don't think we're going to get any of these. And indeed, we couldn't get every one of them, but the list of people that we have here is just absolutely amazing and remarkable. We haven't been able to represent every aspect of diversity in Canada, but I do want to reiterate Medad's comments about us acknowledging the women who have lived on this land from sea to sea for thousands of years before settlers and immigrants arrived. Medad mentioned that the work that he does, the work that I do, is based in the Toronto area, the Dish-with-One-Spoon territory, treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas. I more recently have discovered, after working at home out in the country for a year now, that the part of the GTA that I am actually living on and working on right now is actually a disputed territory within the Dish-with-One-Spoon. So it's a disputed Williams Treaty land, and it was only in 2018 that treaty was actually signed between the governments of Ontario, Canada, and the Williams First Nations treaties, the Williams Treaties First Nations peoples. Reflecting on that made me realize that it takes a long time for us to hear people's voices. It takes a long time for us to ensure that people have full agency in terms of actually making decisions about where they live and how they're involved and how they have access to the world around them and how they have a say in what they want to do. And I think that's a very good lead into the panel today around talking about the voices of women and the agency that women have pre, current, during, post, and post-pandemic. And as somebody said recently, women have been frontlined and they've been sidelined during this pandemic. And I think we really need to be talking about what we've learned and how we can go forward to be sure that women have that we hear their full voices, we make space, that we actively listen, and that we ensure that all women from all walks of life and all aspects of like diverse representation have full agency. So I'm looking forward to hearing from these amazing panelists, my colleagues, and I'm going to start with Dr. Tannenbaum, to talk a little bit about the voices and agency of women in healthcare, in research in the health sciences, and in implementation of health going forward.
Bonjour tout le monde et merci beaucoup pour m'avoir invité pour participer à cet excellent panel. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka here in Montreal. And with humility, I'd also like to acknowledge my white cisgender privileged upbringing, and I come speaking to you as an ally today, not having had the lived experience that many of you have had. When I think about women in healthcare and women in health sciences, I can't help but be proud on the one sense that Canada has a gender-based analysis plus policy. And not all countries have that, right? And then in the health portfolio, we actually translate that into an SGBA plus policy. And here we say sex and gender-based analysis plus policy to differentiate the sex biological aspects that need to be considered because women may be different than men, for instance, as well as gender, more of a social, cultural, multi-construct that includes gender identity, gender roles, gender norms, gender relations, institutionalized gender, and then of course the plus part, and I know I'm not sure that everyone should be added on as a plus, so I'm just putting that out there that we acknowledge that no one wants to be the plus one, to really represent the concept of intersectionality that Kim Crenshaw, Black feminist legal scholars, talked about, when multiple identities that might have been oppressed, for instance, in her case being Black and a woman, made it that much less likely that she would have a voice at the table. And having this SGBA plus policy in Canada means that the federal funds that get invested in health programs, in health research, in health policies have to be able to show that they benefit men, women, boys, girls, and gender diverse people equally. But is that really what's happening? And what can we do to make the vision of this policy become reality? I'll say a few words. COVID's hit women hard. I'm a geriatrician, and I was privileged enough to be called up to help with the outbreaks, the COVID outbreaks in long-term care here in Quebec, where 70% of the healthcare force is made up of by women, mostly newcomers to Canada, people whose first language is not French or English, as well as the patient population that, because women live longer, at least 80% of the residents in long-term care are women, and just equally parts tragic and frustrating to see how women's voices were not heard in dictating how that was managed, quite frankly, in the early days. And I know that we're trying to make that better. And then at the same time, I saw the hit that COVID had to female scientists and academics who were called in to care for their kids, most of them. I mean, caregiving burden is disproportionately borne by women. It is gendered, so hats off to those single dads and dads from different ethnic communities where the responsibility falls on them, but it disproportionately falls on women to care for children, parents, their students even, right? They're more likely to take the time if students are struggling to speak to them. And what happens is that when the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, which is Canada's federal health research funding organization, in February said, whoa, what's this pandemic coming in? Do we need research? Do we need to figure out what the coronavirus is and how to make vaccines? Let's launch a rapid coronavirus or COVID funding opportunity. And in February, we thought we were ahead of the game, and we said, quick, here's an announcement. We'll give you 9 days to get your ideas in, and we'll turn this around so quickly. And we'll be one of the first. Canada will lead COVID research in Canada, and hopefully everything will just work out because we have this GBA plus and SGBA plus policy, and it should all equal out, right? But what we found in that first competition is that female applicants were much less likely to apply. So as in normal times, if we have about a third, which still isn't good enough, but that's up from the 20% when I started there, 27%, normally about 36% of applicants are female. When we got the applicants for that first competition, only 29% self-identified as female. And you might say, well, what's wrong with that? Maybe they were just too busy. But here's the story. Researchers who self-identify as female or women are more likely to take women's needs into account when they do the research. Where you sit is where you stand when you consider the research questions and what needs to be investigated. Think of the car crash dummies back in the 1950s. Of course, they were just male because it was male engineers who made the seatbelts and used the car crash dummies, and women were more likely, like almost 49% more likely to sustain injuries because it wasn't made for our chests and our pregnant bellies and things like that. Same with vaccines. I'm seeing now reports from the CDC that women comprise over 2/3 of individuals who report side effects, and almost all of those reporting serious side effects, including anaphylaxis. Well, why didn't vaccine developers and regulators disaggregate the data and say, well, if women mount a higher immune response, which we think they do to viruses, then maybe they need half a dose of the vaccine and they won't have so many side effects. So, but women think about this. I'm not sure that when you don't have diverse teams, we don't think about this. So anyway, the good news is that we do have policies, and we've launched an equity framework at the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And when we saw that there was a much lower likelihood of females applying to that first competition, we went, oh no, what did we do wrong? And we took a step back and we thought about it, and we realized, of course, we can't rush it. 9 days wasn't enough. That is just not equitable for folks looking after their children. And we also said, maybe there's too much paperwork with all these difficult, CCVs that you've heard of. Maybe we should just let people, we should reduce the administrative burden. And we were also really sad because in that first competition, only 55% of applicants said that sex or gender was important to their research. And I'm thinking, of course, that's not true. So we did, we really took a step back and we said, okay, what policies can we put in place to make research work for women? So we increased it to about 3 weeks, allowing people to apply. We gave extensions to early career researcher status periods so that they wouldn't be so stressed if they were looking after kids and not publishing. We gave doubling of leave credits for people who had to take leads, for parental leads. We gave the peer reviewers more time to review so that we could have more female peer reviewers. We gave childcare allowances for peer reviewers with caregiving responsibilities. We developed this checklist for why sex and gender need to be considered in COVID research, and we made it an evaluation criteria in the second competition. And we even offered top-ups for those scientists who thought sex may not apply to their research so that they could include, female animals in their experiments. And the good news is that it worked. In the second competition, we had almost 39% of applicants who self-identified as female, and the success rate went from 22% for female applicants to 45% for female applicants. And remember, I told you that only 55% of applicants said that they included biological sex as being important for COVID research. Well, in the second competition, 94% of people had thought about it. So that's good news. What I love about that is that when you include thinking about women's needs or sex and gender in the criteria, what we're doing is we're changing our definition of scientific excellence, right? Because you were more likely to get funded if you took the needs of women into account and by having more female investigators. So good news, bad news story. We say the pandemic is really bad, but there have been some silver linings, and I didn't want to be all doom and gloom. So Dr. Ko, thank you for letting me share that little success story. We made mistakes, we're trying to fix them. It won't take away from the cumulative disadvantage that women have had from not having success and having access to that first competition, because we know it's a bit of a rat race. And I think we need to think about that and other identity factors going forward.
Thanks very much, Dr. Tannenbaum. A couple of things that you mentioned there were you know, the importance of paying attention to the data and the difference between forethought and afterthought. I mean, you had to go back and it was an afterthought, right, in terms of having to fix things. And so, you know, we really need to have women in policy making, in politics, in decision making up front, so we don't have to have these afterthoughts. So I'm going to move to Dr. Aragon now and talk about how can we get more women into politics, policy making? What are the barriers, and you know, how can we make this a priority?
Okay, so a couple things. I'm on campus at the University of Victoria. Thank you so much for having me here. I am standing here on Songhees and Wasanich people's territory, and I just want to acknowledge this is where I work, live, celebrate my life. And I am a settler and an immigrant from the United States. Thank you so much to the previous speaker. I have this moment where I'm like, what she said, but add political science or add politics. I really need to also acknowledge your immediate use of Crenshaw's work and intersectionality. This panel is such a great example of the need for us to take our disciplinary, our faculty blinders off and understand, you know, it might sound trite, we're stronger together, but I think STEAM always, science, technology, engineering, arts, and that can include arts and sciences, folks like me within social sciences, and of course, math. So thank you for being inclusive. I really appreciate it. One of the big things that we need to see, though, come out of this pandemic is just a different lens. The usual practices that we've had before, pre-pandemic, don't work, and they certainly are not working for women of all genders, BIPOC folks of all genders, marginalized folks, disabled folks. So we're at a critical point right now globally, and I know this panel understands this, but what we also need to see is more women involved in politics, not just running as candidates, but also working behind the scenes, you know, be it if they're a social media expert, that sort of thing. Because currently what we see is that there's kind of a hierarchy. Men and men of younger ages tend to get into provincial or state politics earlier, whereas the cohort of women come in, they are typically post-childbearing age. So they're no longer caregiving. And so this affects the ability to run for public office. Consequently, we see more women in the local levels, be it the Board of Education, City Council, that sort of thing, which is great, but there's often not this want to not relocate, you know, to Ottawa or DC in the US and elsewhere. It's almost as if, you know, we say childcare is important, supporting families is important, but then we don't invest in these policies because they affect young people, especially people, let's say elder millennials today, Gen X, who might be part of that sandwich generation, taking care of elders, but also raising small children or teenagers. We also need to understand that in terms of politics and what this means, public office, nonprofit, this sort of thing, but that women includes trans women, disabled women, BIPOC women, etc. So the term women is diverse, and this panel understands that. One of the things that I will speak to, and I'll put my political science hat on, Dr. Manon Tremblay has done some fantastic work looking at Canadian politics, and in particular, the ways in which when there's more women in Parliament, doesn't matter which party they are affiliated with, they tend to work together in caucus with one another and support research or policy that supports all people. Because there is this tendency to see women candidates as somehow representing the so-called bread and butter issues or domestic issues. And that includes both the issues inside the country, but also inside the home. When we know that women can do more, women can be supportive of policing or supportive of defunding the police. but there's these certain essentialist roles that sometimes people try to force women into. Overall, Tremblay's work in Canada, as well as other political scientists across the globe, they will know that representation matters. When you have more women involved, the lens for policy changes. I also want to speak to, I've talked about the pandemic. In terms of getting involved in formal politics in Canada, we have Equal Voice, which is a nonpartisan organization that trains people to run for public office, to support women candidates and the like. I've been lucky enough to attend some events, to be a speaker, etc. And many of my social science and gender studies students have been involved with Equal Voice. I'm not affiliated with them officially in any way, shape, or form, not getting paid for them, from them, just so you know that. Also, I am really enjoying seeing this new array of books to teach my students, be it if we're looking at Invisible Women, a book that really looks at the gender dichotomy, men and women, and the way in which we forget about women, be it if it's about cars, and the ways in which they're not built for when I have my high bun and my bun up, or, you know, just it's uncomfortable for me because I'm only 5'2", that sort of thing. But also books like Algorithms of Oppression, which is offers a more intersectional look and connects STEM and STEAM. So we see the ways in which humanities and social science are integral for our colleagues in the sciences to better understand coding biases, algorithm bias, these sorts of things. And I'll put a plug for another book, Race After Technology, another fantastic book that I would encourage folks who come from a more STEM background to check out at your local library or to purchase. I have a lot more to say, but I'm also cognizant that I'd like to give a few of my minutes to my colleague on the mainland when she speaks or they speak. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Aragon. I think that when I talk about science, I'm talking about all the sciences, social sciences, political science. I mean, I think we cannot understand unless we understand. Asking the question, whose voices are we, we listening to, and who is the team that is doing the research and that kind of thing. So I think everybody who is here is part of our understanding of the world around us, which is kind of what science is. I also would put a plug in for Equal Voice. I think that we are stronger when we have the most diverse voices of all the women. Whenever I see a political candidate, even if they're not somebody whose values align with mine, who is advocating in my community, my little farming community in rural Ontario, I will go up and I will thank them for running. I will thank them for their offering to step up for political service or public service, because it's really hard. It's really, really hard, and the abuse is really significant for women in politics. The abuse is worse depending on your background and what you look like. And I think there's a real disincentive to women's participation, to agency, to voice in that setting. So we've got a lot of work to do collectively across the parties, as you mentioned in your comments. I want to move to Dr. Aiken now and talk about the role of post-secondary. What is it that we can do, what you can do, or what can we do collectively, in the post-secondary system in terms of addressing voice and agency and equality and inclusion and those things in that whole sector?
Thank you, Dr. Coe, and thank you to all of my panelists as well. I am truly honored to be here today. I'm coming to you from Halifax, which is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We give thanks to their elders. I also stand in the historical lands of the African Nova Scotian people, and we learn from their traditions. So thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really thrilled to be here, and a little overwhelmed coming after Dr. Tannenbaum and Dr. Aragon, but just absolutely fabulous presentations, very thought-provoking. You know, we know women have been disproportionately affected through the pandemic, and we are heading into a she session. And we need to really think about how we are going to come out of this stronger and with more agency. You know, in post-secondary, we saw less women generally applying for grants right across the tri-agency, provincial agencies, because they were now working from home. Disproportionately, childcare responsibilities fell to them. I'm not saying entirely, but disproportionately. We saw fewer women submitting articles to journals. And yet we saw men doing that more, right? Suddenly they weren't in the lab. Now they could start processing all the data and get it out into journals. So we have now a gap that was at best tenuously closing. As Cara pointed out, it wasn't perfect, but it has now widened even further. And that's going to carry on through. How do we think about changing that? When the shutdown came almost a year ago, so hard to believe, we had to immediately shut down all of our research labs. But more than that, the professoriate had to switch to teaching online at the same time. So there's this huge shift in how you work, extraordinarily stressful. And I will tell you what, people handled it beautifully. People understood, they handled it well. We did everything we could to provide supports. And when we started restarting research, COVID research never stopped, and other essential research, obviously, but when we started restarting research, we did a few really practical things. It was my team who developed the protocol for return to research, but we asked deans to prioritize women and early career researchers who could come back, because we understood already by that point, and this wasn't long after we had been home, maybe 2 months, we realized there was a disproportionate effect on women. And we also, as a university, took up the mantle with two wonderful colleagues at my university, Dr. Allison Thompson and Dr. Christine Chambers. And we've been looking for solutions to childcare problems we have here for some time. It affects the academics, it affects the staff, it affects our postdocs, our grad students. But we were able to initiate training for a babysitting service so students could have some employment, but also so families that really needed it could find a babysitter. And it seems like a small thing, but the people who took advantage of it were extraordinarily grateful. And I think in thinking about small changes like that to help people get back to the work they want to do, I think that was very important. But I just wanted to speak about something else that I found personally as an executive in the university. So because of the position I'm in, it's very external facing, the Vice President of Research and Innovation, and I sit on a lot of boards and committees, provincially, nationally, different things like that. And I would say what surprised me the most personally was when things got tough, as they did for all of us, and the chips were down, the men relied on each other. I have worked hard to get where I am. I have worked hard to have agency and voice, and I support other women in getting there. And suddenly I was back 5 years having to go, excuse me, I have an opinion too. It was unbelievable to me. And I wouldn't say at the university it was like that, but numerous committees and boards that I was on, it was shocking to me that happened. And I'm not shy or retiring. So I was out there, front and center, but I had so many other women calling me, deans, associate deans, calling me and saying, what can I do? Nobody's listening to me anymore. It was really stunning, really stunning. So, I think what was great for me was the support from throughout the organization, from other women. And I know Dr. Tannenbaum and I spoke a few times, and just, you know, having that support of other women around to say, we will get through it. I feel like we're through it now. We're a year on and people are paying attention again. But boy, can we slip into old ways quickly. So I would just put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's very an interesting observation, and thank you for bringing it forward, because it's not always comfortable to say some of these things. Some of your comments reminded me of something that I heard from a young early career researcher, a young woman in math, 2 small children, who when at another institution, when the shutdown was announced, had a male colleague tell her, wow, I'm going to get so many papers written now. And so I think, and you mentioned this a little bit, you know, our concept, and also Dr. Tannenbaum mentioned this, our concept of what constitutes research excellence, and our broadening and our really deepening of our awareness that there are many different ways to assess, you know, impactful contributions beyond the very narrow way that we have been doing it, particularly in the STEM fields, particularly in sciences. And I'm actually encouraged by the Tri-Councils, particularly I've come back from NSERC, and there's been a lot of conversation about how we're going to do this, because the impact may not be now. The impact is going to be a year from now and 2 years from now, when people are going in and they're going to, you know, they're going to have big gaps, or our traditional measures are simply not going to be reflective. So I think post-secondary, the sector's got a lot of work to do. But I'm encouraged by the fact that conversations are happening, and I'm encouraged by your leadership. So thank you for that. I'm going to move to Dr. Moeke-Pickering. I hope I pronounced that right. It's a great privilege to have you on this panel, and I have to make a plug for your book here, which everybody should read. It is a must read. And your insights, both as you know, somebody who has come to Canada as an immigrant, like myself, but also your insights as an Indigenous scholar, and particularly coming from New Zealand, which has been held up as being an example of, you know, great leadership because of the voice and agency of a woman in a leadership position and an engagement with Indigenous people there. So I'm really interested to hear your perspective, both as a member of that community and as a member of the communities here, on, you know, what your views are on those perceptions and how sort of valid they are.
Well, kia ora, warm greetings, and ani, and thank you to our colleagues and panelists, and greetings everyone that have joined. I'm here in Sudbury, Ontario. I am sitting on the Atikmashing Anishinaabe territory. So my voice and agency is to tell stories about brave women and girls. And my middle name comes from my 4th great grandaunt, her name was Ngāmihi Matarangatira. She lived in the late 1800s to early 1900s, and she was from Whakatane, Aotearoa, New Zealand, as am I. Sexualized colonization was used to eclipse the cultural and social standing of Māori women and girls. Sexist influence on our traditions meant that men were given prominence and women were reduced to domestic duties. Ngāmihi's particular story is that she rebuilt an ancestral meeting house, or what we call a marae. Now, this is normally sacred work done by males. It was left to rot in a field. She picked it up and had her family rebuild it. She picked up her cultural obligations regardless of what the social norms expected her to be. She reclaimed her matriarchal leadership at a critical time, namely the influenza pandemic in New Zealand. The marae she built became a hospital for that pandemic. Her and her sisters saved many lives with very little resources, and I am very proud of them. Interestingly, yesterday, Ngāmihi's marae became a safe haven for those running from the impending tsunami in New Zealand. I think she'd be glad to know that. Ngāmihi would be called an influencer of her time. Being a brave woman or girl is not easy. We are sexualized from a young age. We're taught not to speak too loudly. We're told that we cannot be smart. We're told what we can wear. We're taught to keep secrets when we're violated. We're paid low wages and simply put, mansplained about how to be. Think about that. Mansplained how to be. Speaking out is labor intensive. When we demand change, our fight is to dismantle intergenerational traditions of male dominance, and the previous speakers all pointed to what those barriers are and what those solutions could be. And yes, this can be exhausting, and yes, speaking out is necessary. So, what is this force that keeps us going? Kindness. I recall a question that was posed to the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Janni Aragon, about what kept her going through critical times. And she said, kindness. And that word has been permeating throughout the world about her. I agree with her kindness. And through any pandemic, like the time of my great-grandaunts, to now, kindness is still key. To be an influencer, you need both kindness and bravery. I'm really grateful for my colleagues, for those who write, for those who speak up. I'm really grateful for the leaders. I'm really grateful for the girls who ask why. I'm really grateful for us who are inquisitive researchers. I'm really grateful for us who do brave work. And the truth is, we just want a better world for humanity. Like Ngāmihi, she's trying to build her community. Like Janni Aragon, we're building communities. Like those on this panel, we want to make better communities. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a phone ringing in the background, I'm sorry. This is the joy of working from home. I think your comments about kindness and bravery are so, you know, they're so central and so core, and yet it frustrates me endlessly that kindness and compassion seem to be these gendered terms, that somehow kindness is conflated with weakness. And we've seen this a lot in the sort of politics to the south of us, that that is not considered to be sort of a virtue in terms of your voice and your agency. Kindness is not sort of, you know, it's sort of inconsistent with those things. And so I really hope that we can move towards a real understanding of the strength and depth of hanging on to really meaningful values that comes with kindness and compassion and putting them into action. So thank you. So now we'll move on to Dr. Chenier, who has produced a report, which I also have a copy of here, and which I can hold up for you just because that's what I do, that everybody should also read, and which highlights what she describes as radical inclusion, which is really a way of thinking about organizational cultural change. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Chenier, which gives us a sort of a roadmap going forward. So thinking about how can we take some of those silver linings that Dr. Tannenbaum talked about maybe, and some of the things that we've observed and we've learned out of this pandemic, the differential, disproportionate impacts, and maybe think about intentionally building towards this radical inclusion, which is a term I really love.
Thank you, merci, et kia ore, Dr. Moeke-Pickering. That was, I'm so happy to be following you, and I hope that you find that what I'm saying here today resonates with what you said. I also am going to use a lot of visuals to move my talk forward, so I invite people, if they're in gallery view, to switch to speaker view just for this. Well, you can stay on it if you like, but just because I'm going to show a lot of visuals for this presentation. So yeah, I'm talking about radical inclusion, and you know, I want to talk about what is radical inclusion. And I have here an image of the cover of our report, and this came from the work of Dr. Wendy Harbour in the United States, who's a disability activist, and she was really fed up with this image of exclusion, segregation, integration, and inclusion. And that's where it stopped, was inclusion. And she felt that that was problematic. And the point that she made is that with the inclusion model, the structure remains the same. And it's the structure that's the problem. So she came up with this idea of, you know, the misformed circle or the altered circle, the structure changes. And the more I talk about this, and I've been talking about it a lot since August when it came out, the more I've been thinking about it. So what you see there is the, you know, my friend who's a professional designer, paid a lot of money for that. But here's my, this is the free version. So the more I've been thinking about it, you know, first of all, like, get rid of the circle, but also that it needs to be porous so that people can come in and out. Just ideas can flow in and out, you know, and tired people, it includes tired people as well. So, and we need to acknowledge when people leave because the system doesn't work for them anymore, you know, so it needs to look out beyond the circle, right? Who's there and what's there. So I come to this with a deep critical framework to EDI work, that's as it's known today. And so I want to explain what radical inclusion is. And I'll start here because I think this is Jay Dolmaj, who is a disability studies scholar. And I think if we could spend an hour just talking about this quote, that would be enough. So he says retrofitting and other forms of accommodation are simply intended, it's showing up backwards on my screen. Oh, hold on, here I can see it forward and I can read better. Are simply intended to temporarily even the playing field. The aspiration is not to empower students, and I add here staff and faculty, to achieve with disability, but rather to achieve around disability or against it or in spite of it. And you can see right away how we could look at BIPOC folks, women, queer folks. Oh, and I should say that I'm on the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh and Coquitlam people. I myself am mixed white settler and Métis from Penetanguishene area, and also queer. So I relate to this, but I live as a white, I live and have enjoyed all of the privileges of a white person. So I come at this as a woman, someone who was raised a woman and who is queer, but also extraordinarily privileged as a white academic. Nevertheless, I too experienced the ways in which I'm meant to achieve within the structure as it exists. So the disableism, and again, we can replace this with sexism, racism, colonialism, built into that overarching desire for able-bodiedness and able-mindedness comes from the belief, and here's the heart of it, that disability should not and cannot be something that is positively claimed or lived within. And this is the, I'll say, daily humiliation we suffer as people who are not white, able-bodied, cisgendered men, right, in this world. And I'm not saying that white, cisgendered, able-bodied men are not also humiliated and traumatized by the system, because they are too. All right. So how do we get the change though? Everybody's talking about the change. Everybody's like, oh yeah, that's great. But how we get the change is how we see. And this is the issue that we're all confronting, is we only see the world as it appears to us. So as an able-bodied person, the ways in which the world is prohibitive doesn't appear to me. I have to actually consciously look for it. So what I love about this cartoon is that it makes the point, if you clear the ramp first, then everybody, people that are able-bodied and people who are not able-bodied can get up. But that has to be pointed out. So how do we get to people to the point where they can see that, if that's not the world that's affecting them, right? So I don't know about you, but a lot of responses I'm hearing at the institution I'm at is, male chairs are saying things, and I've seen white women, actually, I've seen white women do the same thing. They're like, how come I didn't know any of this? To which the question is always, why not? Why don't you know? Why don't you know, right? So this is what I'm focusing on here is that part of it. So I also love this this story here. This is a tweet from a wonderful woman who I follow, Why we don't often talk about the skills disability gives us. Since my injury, I have listened to hundreds of audiobooks. My ability to cognitively process audio has improved so much. And then she asks, what are some of the skills disability has given you? So it's not an asset. I'll tell you though, my queerness is an asset. You know, it's a huge asset in the world because I'm so grateful for the critical lens I have on the world as a result of being queer. I'm not always grateful for the critical lens I have as being as a woman. I'm mostly traumatized by that. But the point here is that it's an asset, right? But we don't see it if we go back to Jay Dolmage's quote, that is how we are treated in the institution. Oh, you need maternity leave? We'll fight for it and then we'll give it to you, right? You need a little extra funding because the playing field's not level. Okay, we'll give you a little extra funding, right? But that doesn't fix the system, right? So how do we not only change the structure, but also see this as an asset, right? So I'm sure these arguments are familiar to most of you folks here. So I drew, for radical inclusion, I drew the main frame comes from Colleen Shepherd, who's at McGill, and this book, Inclusive Equality. So she says, formal equality or equal treatment without regard to the social context of inequality fails to address, as we all know here, systemic discrimination, which occurs when, quote, apparently neutral rules, standards, practices, policies have disparate effects on different communities and groups and societies. Okay, that's all very familiar to all of us, right? But she takes it in a direction I really like. She says, inclusive equality requires a restructuring of the historical, structural, and systemic relations that produce, reproduce, and justify exclusion and inequality. But here's where I think it gets much deeper. She says it requires attentiveness to substance and process, which is, we've heard a little bit about how you change the process, right? And here's where I think it resonates with what Dr. Moeke-Pickering was saying, it's relational. And this is a huge problem for us because in the institution, we exist as like brains on sticks, right? And, you know, we're all individuals independent. Like I achieve my success because I hold myself up and, you know, and work really hard. And that's how I get my success. And as feminists have always criticized that model. But we need to think of ourselves as relational. Certainly COVID has invited us to do that. But, you know, as I say, as people get excited about, oh, everything's going to be different. Remember after 9/11 and people said, oh, New York is so different. Everybody's so friendly and nice and kind and they all stop and they're caring. How long did that last, right? We know, like those of us who've been around for a while, it's not going to last, you know? So sorry, don't mean to be so cynical, but like, we have to be real about it. Okay, so taking any of this seriously will cause a lot of discomfort for people like myself who benefit enormously from colonialism and white supremacy. Robin DiAngelo, who's well known for her work on white fragility, and then the need for white folks to develop what she calls racial stamina, argues that we can use our discomfort as a door in to examine white privilege by asking ourselves, why does this unsettle me? What would it mean for me if this were true? How does this lens change my understanding of racial dynamics? So you see, I'm going back to that cartoon of seeing that if you clear the ramp first, right? Like we have to ask ourselves very intentionally a different set of questions. So solidarity across difference, and I'm again going back to Colleen Shepherd here, it means recognizing that what we can't see matters. And that's a hard sell because, you know, I'm living a good life, right? Like disability doesn't affect me now. So why should I take time out to see that? I got a million things to do, right? So that's the conversation though I feel that we need to have. So it means recognizing that my well-being and your well-being are interdependent. And I think it's when we experience that after 9/11 with COVID, that's when you get all these expressions of, oh, thank God for cleaners, you know? Thank goodness for grocery clerks, how we love them. Will we raise their pay? No, no, no. But we love you, you know, hashtag heroes, right? So this is kind of the points that we want to sort of poke and push on. So if we were in a room together right now, all of us, I would lead us in the following exercise. I would, let me find my right slide. I would have you all turn to each other and ask these questions. Who are you? What brings you joy? What challenges are you facing right now? And how can I help? Who are you? What brings you joy? What challenges are you facing right now? How can I help? And that's the conversation that I think we need to have. One of the arguments that I've been making, which is very unpopular, you know, I come out of a history tradition, and when we teach history to teach empathy, but I'm done with empathy. I think empathy is the wrong way to go. I think curiosity, because empathy, we continue to construct the other as oppressed, and we only see them as oppressed. Whereas curiosity, we approach other people as our equal. Who are you? What brings you joy? What challenges are you facing right now? And when you ask those questions and get an answer, you want to help. But if we don't stop and ask those questions, our desire to help is not ignited. So I am urging people to stop pushing for empathy and start encouraging people to be curious. So I was asked to speak a little bit about COVID. So we did a very quick survey, and in the chat will be shared links to, I created a resource page, so because people always want to, what was that book? What was that cartoon? So there's a link that's been shared in the chat, and you can find everything I've shown you here today, including, we did 4 questions, and this was the last one. So I raised a child. My child is, I'm now a gran, but my child is in her 30s, and I have a 4-year-old grandchild. And, but I knew, having been a parent and also being close with so many female faculty, how profoundly affected they were by COVID, as you all have spoken about. So we did this survey, and I tried everything to get my administration, even publishing this publicly. And the VP academic just kept saying it's a workload issue. Basically, it's the union. It's up to the union. So what if they had said, what challenges are you facing right now, and how can I help? And that's what I'm saying was missing, right? Instead, what we got was, you know, a message like at Christmas time, we got a little message, put down your phone. You know, it's like, yeah, so that's not helping, right? They don't, so, and actually this ties to the big question BIPOC people are demanding now, data. Data, we need data, right? Because, but they don't wanna, folks who don't wanna help, they don't wanna ask the question, and they don't wanna get to know you, because they know if they get to know you, these things cannot be left as they are. So as long as we don't ask the question, we're okay, right? We're okay. I mean, so the last thing I'll say is that I'm new to administrative speak. So I've been a happy little historian working in the archives all by myself for years. And the last 5 years I've been doing this work. And so I've become a quick study in administrative speak. And I've learned, you know, I was just listening to, I won't name names, but anyways, an administrator, when asked the question, well, what about cohort hires? Their response was, well, you know, there's a lot of debate about that, and we just don't have agreement. It's an ongoing conversation. And I now know that means not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. So, you know, we have to ask each other, and it starts in these conversations. Yes, there has to be the big policy picture. Absolutely, there has to be big policy. But there's a way also we can start the conversation, you know, even with ourselves, turning to our female colleagues, you know, who are you? What brings you joy, right? And this is, so on the one, I'm not saying, you know, we just have to be nice to each other. It's far from what I'm saying here. But I'm saying that we can have these difficult conversations simply by opening ourselves up to each other and approaching each other with curiosity and building out policy and doing our practices from that particular place. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. It's been fantastic, and I look forward to the rest of the speakers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chenier. I just want to remind all of the attendees that you can ask questions of the panelists in the Q&A section of the Zoom world we're in. and that there will be a poll coming up just to get an idea of the demographics of who's actually attending. I just want to go back to a couple of things that you mentioned, Dr. Chenier, which is, you know, we need the data. We need to know what, oh, I see the questions up there. We need to know what we're not seeing. We need to know who's, you mentioned, we can't, you know, if we can't see what matters, we can't act on it. So we need to know what's invisible. We need to know what we're not seeing. We also need to know whose voices we're not hearing. And I think that sometimes, you know, is a bit of a challenge for people to put value on things that they don't have or they don't see. So there's huge value in everything we're missing. So we've got to go look for it. We've got to go find it. We've got to go identify it. We've got to go kind of, you know, we've got to go to it. I wouldn't even say we've got to go bring it in. We've got to go to it. So, and also the comment about a reluctance to do that because it's uncomfortable and these conversations are uncomfortable. And I happen to think as an immigrant that that's a very Canadian sort of sense, that there is a discomfort with uncomfortable conversations, and we've got to go into those uncomfortable places, and sometimes they're very discomforting, they're very painful, as Dr. Moeke-Pickering mentioned. We have to talk about and interrogate some of those very real issues around systems and structural racism and systems of oppression and narrow frame of reference for research excellence, all of those kinds of things, and challenge the paradigms. So I love the concept of radical inclusion. I think your version of the drawing is better than the the graphic designer you paid a lot of money for. But I think it's really about taking that and being intentional and having the courage and the curiosity and the kindness, as we've already heard. So let's see, there is a question, there's a poll, please fill that out. Is that now live, Silva? I've got too much technology here. And there is a question from Anna Sophia. We need to invite experts in the field to help make sense of the data. Yeah, so we do hear a lot about data and turn it into ongoing actionable activities too, especially in the scientists. So would anybody like to speak to the need to collect data, the fact that we need more, we need more than data. I've sometimes heard in post-secondary that, or at the federal level, that we need to collect data and then that's it. It's like, that's not enough. We need to actually act on that. So I'll throw that out to anybody who would like to answer. Making sense of collecting and making sense of data. Anybody want to speak to that?
I don't know. I don't want to put her on the spot, but Dr. Tannenbaum, do you want to talk about the CIHR article that was published recently with the data?
Sure. Absolutely, we need to collect more data is the quick and absolutely positive answer. From the government's perspective, and I'm just repeating what I've been told, there are many issues around confidentiality and, of course, the ownership of data principles that we've learned a lot from Indigenous communities. So on the one hand, there can't be good management without measurement. But on the second hand, if you misuse that data, for instance, and say, I've had Indigenous colleagues tell me, oh, so everyone just says, look, Indigenous people have more diabetes because we've measured diabetes in Indigenous people, and it must be because, I don't know, they don't exercise enough or they have bad food, without recognizing all the systemic and historic and structural factors that have led up to that. Then that data can be used not to aid people, but to, I think, exacerbate some of the negative perceptions that are there. So in government, there's this tension right now between collecting more data and ensuring the confidentiality, privacy, and that systems are in place to use that data in a curious, compassionate, helpful way, rather than misusing it and stating, oh, look, women didn't submit as many research papers. I guess they just didn't work as hard during the pandemic, right? Because when we collect data, it's just the quantitative data, often without all the qualitative explanations, which I think speaks to the need for mixed methods data. So what Alice is referring to is some of the stats that I told you about were published in PNAS, and Nature also highlighted some of the work that we do in terms of measuring applicants that identify as female. We actually have a self-identity questionnaire. Some of the choices are not ones that I think people on this call would be happy with. So, StatsCan is looking at reorganizing those priorities, because what if you're biracial? Do you self-identify as Black or white? And sometimes we don't even give those choices. We just say, are you part of a racialized group, which really doesn't speak to specific, anti-racism against specific underrepresented groups and the interventions that we might need to make for instance, anti-Asian racism because of the COVID pandemic versus anti-Black racism because of other systemic factors. So yes, data is good. So data could be your friend, but data could also be your enemy, unless it's used in the right way. There are efforts undergoing to better collect data. A lot of people say we shouldn't even be collecting data on biological sex, because truly what matters is a person's gender and how they self-identify. But the government might say, well, for OECD statistics about life expectancy, that's dictated to some extent by the genes that you were born with at birth. So how can we not collect biological sex and only gender? So all this to say that if anyone has a perfect answer, please bring it on, write it in the chat. We are open to suggestions. Efforts are being made, but it's a trickier space than I thought when Alice and I challenged, for instance, the tri-agency. Can you collect the proper data? Can you make it transparent? Can you just show it? Also, there's government rules about if you have less than 5 people or 5% per cell count, then you might be able to identify who you're talking about. So, we don't show data when there's small groups, which of course are the groups whose voices that we want to hear. Yeah, I'll stop there. Hopefully that shows a little bit of the complexity of the issue. I think we should be embracing the complexity, but finding the right answer is also very awkward for a lot of people. There's some hesitancy about not moving forward on a solution until we find the right solution. And I don't know that there's a perfectly right solution, because this is an evolving discourse that we're learning iteratively from, but there's hesitation from some of those in decision-making power, and unfortunately I'm not one of the main ones, to, we've been burned, we don't want to do the wrong thing, so let's not do anything until we know it's 100% right. Sorry, thanks for priming me, Alice. Obviously this is a very charged issue, but again, looking for solutions and way forwards. The political will is there. The skills to do it properly, I think, are still in the making.
Thank you.
Complex answer for a simple question. Sorry, Imogen.
So I'm just looking at it's really a comment here about, so I see this a lot in science, is that because you're a woman in science, and often it's a white woman in science, you're automatically an expert in EDI. So we need to identify, or do we need to identify and address the levels of expertise around EDI issues, particularly in things like policy development for, let's say, science and research. So who wants to answer that one?
I could take a quick stab.
Go, Cara.
Do you want to go ahead, Dr. Aragon? Let me let you go first. I answered the last one.
The question actually reminded me of a point earlier, and so if I can ask the question, I would really appreciate it. Dr. Aiken, how did colleagues respond to the focus on supporting research of women or researchers who identify as women? What sort of reaction did you have to that? Because I can't imagine it was completely positive.
I would say that I didn't get any negative reaction from the question. I didn't get, the ask out there, please prioritize. I didn't get any negative reaction to that. And in fact, I heard from some of the deans, you know, that's a good idea. Whether it translated into women coming back sooner, I don't know, because I couldn't control all the other variables of why they weren't able to come in. All I could control was, who, you know, could we open up the university again with proper protocols, safety protocols, etc. So no negative response. I think at Dalhousie we work very diligently to try and understand EDI and do better around EDI, actually accessibility as well. We really try. So no, I didn't get any pushback whatsoever, and people commented they thought it was a good idea. Whether it translated into more women actually applying to come back or getting preferential treatment, I can't say, because I don't, you know, I only know who applied, not who didn't apply. Right? So again, it would speak to collecting the data, but it's hard to, when you don't have when you don't have the data.
Thank you for that. I just, I can only speak to what I know within political science, and seeing some of my colleagues who are editors and noting that there's a 90% drop in articles sent to the array of different political science journals. And, you know, the rumbling that I hear in my own campus, and I'm quite active with our faculty association on the Black Person of Color caucus. So, you know, I've heard things here locally. And so when you were fielding your part, that was something that just stood out, and it was kind of related to the question that Dr. Ko just posed, but I took a left turn. Thank you.
That's okay. We're continually pivoting. Isn't that what we say in the academy? It's about a pivot. We're going to pivot this way and pivot that way. So I have another question here. As provincial and federal 2021 budgets and programs are coming, and the fact that women were more impacted by COVID-19, do you feel that women being less present than usual in these organizations, as they're often more busy coping, caring with kids, parents, jobs, will have an effect on the coming programs and budgets? So that really does speak to who is making policy, who is in the room when the decision is made, who is, you know, if you've seen Hamilton, you know, I want to be in the room, who is there? And if they are not there, what's going to happen? So who wants to take a crack at that?
Alice. I'll just start, and I know I totally defer to my historian and political science colleagues. You know, when we look at our provincial premiers, we see zero diversity. When we look at most mayors of cities, we'll see some women, but you know, we're already not at a lot of the decision-making tables, or not leading the decision-making tables. And this, I think, has made it worse.
I would second that, Alice. I loved what you said about we're not leading the decision-making tables. I don't sit and I don't make the decisions about budget. Certainly, I was impressed by the federal fall economic statement, where we heard from the finance minister about the 50-30 principle, that 50% of everything should be women, 30% should be representative of racialized groups in Canada. So I've been quoting 50-30 everywhere. I've sat at tables around budget submissions, and I speak up very strongly for women, and then somebody else goes and make the priorities, and I don't always see women's needs represented in the top 2 to 3 priorities. So having sat at not a budget decision-making table, you know, I'm only on a science board for a national funding organization. Yeah, we voice, but if you're not the one making the final decision, then I don't think there's a guarantee that, you know, equity will be served. I don't know the answer, except for more women to take on those leadership positions. And in terms of, I saw there was a question about, should organizations be appointing EDI champions? Well, a champion isn't the same as a vice president, or a champion isn't the same as replacing the leader of the organization so that final decision-making power resides with someone who could actually change things instead of giving opinions and being told, yes, yes, that's important and we know that and we're working on it. I mean, the working on it thing drives me crazy. It should be yesterday, not tomorrow. I experience some frustration in my work. I don't know if anyone's feeling that. You know, one of the challenges I face is that we haven't implemented solutions that have been obvious to us for years. What brings me joy is that the conversations at least are a lot more prevalent than they were a long time ago.
Can I just go to Dr. Moeke-Pickering, because I want to get your reflection on the fact that women's voices and the Prime Minister in New Zealand speaking to issues and actually decision making around policy seems to be well received, but you know, how does that happen in a jurisdiction? How does that happen in an inclusive way? And do you think it's actually going to lead to more women being involved in policy making in that particular country? What can we learn from New Zealand, if anything?
Well, thank you. I think it's the groundswell. It's making. I want to just go back to what we're firsts in many of our fields. You know, first president, first vice president, first researcher, first in our family to be at universities. But it's what I was trying to make the link back, which is, but we had our ancestors before us. And if we could learn from them and bring them forward, we become the groundswell. We bring all of us together. We're not going to turn up and say, I'm the first of this, when in fact, there was a community behind me. And I think that speaks volumes to, you know, what was happening in the US. They got in behind and got the votes going, the women's marches, the whole links across, the social activism, the amplifying of voices, gave us the courage, if you like, or the bravery to start standing up and say, I'm going to be counted. I'm going to be stepping up to the next level now. I'm going to be the director and I need everybody's support around me. And the same as with promotions for our, we need to be sharing our strategies and sharing our resources for promotion. We need to be sitting around a table when we look at data. We need to be talking a lot more about what does EDI mean? Like we opened that question about EDI and I was not prepared for the absolute crisis that came from some of my Black colleagues. I wasn't prepared for the stories. It broke my heart. And I wasn't even prepared for understanding my own levels of privilege. When you listen to Indigenous peoples of this land, and I'm an immigrant here. So, you know, it has to be a movement. And I think in New Zealand, the work done by Indigenous peoples there, the treaty that they have, and the groundswell of support that they have, I think was the momentum that pushed her and that movement forward. But I honestly think her honesty, I honestly think her kindness, I honestly think she was young. And, you know, looking forward, she grew up in an era where she was okay to give her voice and express it. She grew up in a time which she's only young, but she was able to say, I can't do this, I need help. You don't see that a lot in some of the men's stories. She called for help and help came and she listened. I think that's really important. But I think over 50% of her MPs are people of color, from Asian to different religions. And I think that also makes a difference. You got a lot more people around the room. Frustrating for some people because they want the answer straight away. Is it yes? Is it no? Should it be EDI? EDI is a journey. It takes time. And it depends on the crisis that's going on in a particular institute or an organization. And we should be ready. I really think that we could learn from her and many other women leaders as well.
And I think, you know, just to expand on that, there is a real concept of a glass cliff. Like a lot of women are or have been first in what they do, or other equity deserving groups. are first in what they do. And it's a glass cliff. The risk of failure is high. It's not a glass ceiling. The risk of failure is high, and you do it anyways. You push anyways. And I mean, I think Jacinta Ardern is just an amazing person we can all look up to. But we really have to understand and support others who are with us and around us as we look at that. Because of how I look and how I sound, I'm first generation Canadian, and a shout out to my sister, who's one of our participants today, who's the CEO of her company. We came here, and our family came here, and we did well because our parents prioritized education. But I mean, it can be a scary place.
Mm-hmm. I saw something, I think it was on a Facebook post or whatever, which said, somebody had said, oh, we need a Jacinta Ardern here. And somebody had responded, there are Jacinta Ardens everywhere. You just have to vote for them. And I think, we have to support those people. We have to build those communities. We have to raise up and lift the voices of women across the incredible diversity and through an intersectional lens. Dr. Chenier, I'm going to give you the last word because I'm just cognizant of time here. So you have to be cognizant of time as well. So any final thoughts on voice and agency for women, for International Women's Day? The theme is Choose to Challenge. I would like to challenge personally that panel of premiers from across the country. That Dr. Aiken just put that visual in my head again, and it's it's a big room full of white male mediocrity as far as I'm concerned, and we need to do something about that. So Dr. Chenier, what would you like to tell everybody and leave them with?
Oh, no pressure there. Well, I wanted to share a tweet that somebody wrote, a man named John Grisham. Something we all need to keep in mind, thinking about moving women up into these positions. The structure will never allow itself to be put in harm's way. If you've been chosen to lead the structure, it's because you've been deemed safe and recognized as a steward of the structure and its survival. So that's, to me, it's not enough. Also, I shared in the chat an article by my colleague, a political scientist, Genevieve Fuji-Johnson. In the academy, white women are doing really well. So we have to stop talking about women. We are either talking about white women or BIPOC women, because we too often we use, and I appreciate the diversity. I hate that word, but the diverse voices here. There's multiple voices here, and people who are bringing the perspectives of BIPOC folks, and that's really important and vital. But I guess what I want to say is we need to, those of us who are advocates need to be ever mindful of the ways in which white women are doing really well. And again, I point to the article that Genevieve just published on that point. And, and I was in this relates back now to science. I was in a meeting about, there's a new documentary Picture a Scientist, I think. So I was in a meeting, we were about bringing it to SFU and paying for the license and everything. And there was a Black woman in our group, and she said, Black women won't come because they don't see themselves as just women. And I think we have to hear that, that's so important. So if we really want to move forward, how do we think about what we're doing differently in light of that? So that's an invitation to grow and expand. I know sometimes it's hard to hear those things and it makes us shut down. Oh, I'm never going to do it right. You're asking so much of me. But I want you to see it as an invitation to open up and see the world more broadly. So thank you for the opportunity.
We're all going to make mistakes. It is a journey. We need to keep raising each other up, listening to the voices of everybody, really being intentional about who's not in the room and whose voice we're not making space for. I often tell groups of young people that I talk to, particularly young women, it's you have a voice, you have a right to use it, and you have a reasonable expectation that everybody else will shut up and listen. So it's a reasonable expectation that there should be space for you, for your voice to be heard and for your agency to be fully formed. I'm going to hand this back to Medad now. Thank you so much to the panelists, Dr. Moeke-Pickering from Laurentian University, Dr. Aiken from Dalhousie, Dr. Chenier from SFU, Dr. Tannenbaum from, I'm just going to say Ottawa or Montreal, Ottawa, CIHR and University of Montreal, Dr. Aragon from University of Victoria, and to CSPC for hosting this. So back to Dr. Dr. Hariri. Pandemic brain, pandemic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Coe.
Over to you.
You haven't finished. Please go ahead.
No, I finished. Over to you, Dr. Hariri.
Thank you very much. I don't think there was any other panel that could serve as a start of panel sessions for this series for 2021. Thank you so very much. I must admit that was one of the best panels that we have ever had at CSPC. Thanks to you all, and it was great. I learned a lot, and I think there are a lot of points for our future reflections. We all must do that, and the conversation is not going away, should continue this, and we all have to reflect on all the points. And I promise that CSPC will follow up and will cover these stories and this conversation as we move forward. Thank you so very much again, and happy International Women's Day to all women in the room and participants. I want to ask participants, please take a moment to answer one question after this window pop-up. And that's one question about, you can rate this panel and send us your ideas all the time. And I want to share the information about the next session and encourage to book your calendar. That's on March 17 at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's an interview with Dr. Rick Pant, Chief Scientist and Chief Science Advisor of Natural Resources Canada. The topic is building a digital accelerator, applying innovative digital technologies to accelerate science and policy integration. So it will be a very interesting conversation. I really encourage everyone to book their calendar. Once again, put your hands together for excellent panelists who attended here, and thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend. Look forward to staying in touch. Please keep sending us your ideas. And don't forget, pop-up window, answer that question. Thank you and have a great day.